Welcome back to the channel, everyone. Mr. P here again, which is once more unsurprising, since it's my channel after all. It may be surprising since I haven't posted in a while, but that's beside the point. I mentioned a while back that I would be doing a review of an indie RPG that came out a couple of months ago called Sea of Stars, and have yet to upload said review. Well, I finished it about a week or two after it came out, but then I got sidetracked by another tiny little RPG called Baldur's Gate 3 that has been eating up my life. I'm not doing a separate review for that, but it's awesome, and if you love tabletop RPGs, or D&D, or if you play Larian Studios' Divinity series, you'll likely love this game too. I'm almost done with my first playthrough and can't wait to start a different character and do a different type of playthrough. Anyway, as far as Sea of Stars is concerned, let's get to talking about that, shall we? What is it? How does it play? And is it worth your time? Well, Sea of Stars is produced by Sabotage Studios, which you may be familiar with if you played their first game, a side-scrolling action platformer heavily inspired by Ninja Gaiden called The Messenger. I actually hadn't heard of it until this game came out and saw the buzz surrounding it as being connected. You don't have to play The Messenger to enjoy this game by any means, but there are Easter eggs and direct references for those familiar with it. Without getting into spoilers, Sea of Stars functions as a distant prequel to the events of The Messenger. It really doesn't matter what order you play it in, but I always enjoy playing things in release order. Something about seeing how things are and then learning about how they came about, rather than the other way around, has always fascinated me. Either way, play order doesn't matter since the stories stand on their own. You're not missing out by not having played one before the other. The game itself is styled as a sort of love letter to the RPGs of the 90s, and it wears its inspiration boldly on its sleeve. Two major influences are clearly Super Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger, two games that you really can't go wrong with if you've never played them, and with the recent re-release of Super Mario RPG on the Nintendo Switch, you've got the opportunity to play it once again on new hardware in a fresh coat of paint. I haven't had a chance to get my hands on it just yet, but I definitely look forward to playing it when I get the chance. Coincidentally, Super Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger were the games that got me hooked on RPGs in the first place, along with Final Fantasy VI. I've seen other people mention Golden Sun as an inspiration for this game as well, but to be honest, I've never played it outside of maybe an hour or two back in college in the early 2000s. I've heard it's great, though. Speaking of other games I've never finished, there seems to be maybe some borrowing from Octopath Traveler. I've started that game several times and then always get distracted by something else. Keep in mind, I bought the game as one of the first games I got with my Switch about 5 years ago, and I've never played it through. Maybe someday I'll get around to it. Anyway, the reason I mention these games has to do with the battle mechanics themselves. One of the major features of the battle system in Sea of Stars is the use of timed hits and timed blocks. If you aren't familiar with how this works, the idea is that when a character attacks or is being attacked, pressing the button at the correct time either increases the damage dealt or reduces the damage received, respectively. The battle system is heavily focused around this, and players need to master this in order to not get curb stomped into the ground, because certain enemies and bosses can hit like a truck, and with a low level cap and low HP numbers through most of the game, that can mess you up quick. Even in the endgame, the optional bosses, well, optional if you don't plan on completing the game, that is, can hit pretty hard, so learning to block and mitigate accordingly is vital. Now, there are of course accessories you can use that will either make your life harder or easier. There are a variety of effects you can equip throughout the game, one of which doubles your HP. Incidentally, I was grinding for XP near the end of the game, which, let me just point out, is practically useless. The level cap is 30, if I remember correctly, and the amount of XP needed is ridiculous, considering how little XP you start getting. Anyway, the point is, I didn't feel like resting frequently, so I equipped the Amulet of Storytelling, 100 additional HP and auto healing after battle, and the Guardian Aura, increased defense, and grinded for a little while just to see what the XP drop-off was. Anyway, long story short, this is all near the end of the game before the final dungeon. Well, I forgot I had this stuff equipped and honestly wasn't paying attention to the numbers anyways. I went about doing all the optional bosses, etc., and at some point thought, man, when did my HP get so high? And then I realized what had happened after I had already defeated one very powerful boss and thought to myself, well, Thank goodness I still had that thing on, or else I would have died multiple times over to some of those attacks. Yes, I turned them off the rest of the game and did it legit. Anyway, the point is that learning to block and do damage correctly is very important in this game, and there are actually some accessories that help you learn the timing on when these button presses are done correctly if you need them. Another major feature of the combat is the party system. As in Chrono Trigger, your party members learn different combination skills between 2 characters or among 3 of them. Several of these can be found in treasure chests throughout the world, so it's certainly beneficial to go and find all of them. Fortunately, if you aren't sure if you missed any chests or not, there is a map feature you get in the game that will tell you if any of the zones have chests left over to find. Anyway, the game uses a system where you build up skill points by using normal attacks, and then your abilities use these skill points. Essentially, it's a build and spend resource system, similar to what you have in Diablo, but only in a turn-based system rather than an ARPG style. A combo gauge builds up on the side, which is determined by performing timed hits, blocks, taking turns, breaking enemy locks, more on that later, and basically doing just about anything in battle. Once you build up the required number of points, 1, 2, or 3, you can execute a combo action. There are also ultimate skills that use the entire gauge and do some pretty significant damage, so whenever you can use them, use them. However, that's not always convenient because of either needing to use combos to heal, or because of another mechanic mentioned earlier, lock breaking. Every enemy has special attacks that can be neutralized by using certain types of abilities against them. Sword locks are broken by slashing damage, hammer locks are broken with blunt weapons, solar and lunar locks are broken with solar and lunar abilities, and so on and so forth. There are many combinations of locks, and frequently you'll find that you don't have the abilities to break the locks, and your best bet is to just try to defend against it when it hits. Now, part of this is because sometimes you'll be in the story and you don't have the right character yet, but this usually doesn't last long since they're good about giving you what you need. Fortunately, you can switch out party members basically whenever you want, assuming you have a turn available. The tricky part is coming across scenarios when you need a skill to break a lock, but you're just about out of turns and one of the skills you need isn't available because you're low on skill points, or the person that uses that skill has already taken a turn. Admittedly, that could just be because of bad planning on my part and not paying attention more when I was fighting stuff. Anyway, when done correctly, you can interrupt enemy attacks, including boss super moves, which is, again, very important to learn how to do correctly. All in all, the combat system isn't terribly complicated. The game does a pretty decent job of teaching you what to do, and it's up to you to master what mechanics it has. My only gripe is just how easy it is to burn through skill points, how long it feels like it takes to rebuild your resources, and then the rate of building up combo points feels like a slog sometimes. In Chrono Trigger, you had a much larger pool of skill points, and you could use combos more frequently. Still, given how strong some of the combos in this game can get, and the low level cap, this was clearly because of balancing issues. I just wish the combo gauge filled up just a bit faster than it does. Overall, I never felt like any deaths were cheap or unavoidable. That said, it did start to feel a bit repetitive as the game went on, and I'm not exactly sure why that is. Games like Super Mario RPG and Chrono Trigger didn't change their mechanics throughout the game, and there's a lot of the same type stuff here. I don't know. I think it's just that fights seem to drag on longer than they needed to because enemies take reduced damage when they have locks to break. Getting near the end of the game, unless it's the final dungeon, I want to be able to just one-shot most trash mobs and move on. Again, not a bad battle system, but it got stale sooner than I would have liked it to. Graphically, the game is very appealing. It's a nice throwback to a graphical era that didn't actually exist. Super Nintendo graphics never quite amounted to this, but if you want to look at that era through rose-colored glasses, then this would certainly fit that description. Character designs are anime-ish. It's if CalArts did anime, but didn't turn out like the abomination that is Steven Universe. It fits the tone the game is going for, I'll say that. The lighting is very well done. You have forests, graveyards, caves, and even a haunted mansion, which is one of my favorite areas. Although, I did see one of the most idiotic things I've ever seen in a game here. Notice that you have these dancing ghosts here. Now, if you look closer, you'll see that you have a heterosexual pair of ghosts, and then you have clearly 2 gay and 2 lesbian dancing ghosts here. What a victory for inclusion and diversity and representation. Now, I don't want to harp on the game here. After all, we know how important representation is. I want to commend the creators here because they have done the gay and lesbian community a service here. If they hadn't included this, how would all of the gay and lesbian gamers know that they too someday can aspire to become members of the undead and be stuck for eternity spinning in circles in a haunted mansion trying to kill any would-be heroes who cross their paths? I mean, as a straight man, seeing the heterosexual couple here inspired me to strive for doing that very thing. Oh, but the ghosts still look a bit too white. Cancel Sabotage Studios for enforcing white supremacy among the undead.
This woman represents the same white image of beauty that has oppressed women for centuries.
Hate crime, hate crime.
Where are the nude models of color?
The people of girth, the handicapable, the elderly, the queer.
Well, I'm sorry, it's just naked, fat, black, crippled dykes are hard to find.
This is also incredibly stupid. First of all, I don't actually care about representation in the slightest bit. Could not care any less. When I watch Luke Cage or even Black Panther, I didn't sit around saying, you know, I can't help but feel that I'd be able to relate to some of these characters more if they were white.
That's racist!
However, if someone was trying to have this sort of representation in the game, I would think that they could do a better job of including it than with a couple of ghosts you have to kill
Hate crime, hate crime.
that most people probably didn't notice.
You might not have noticed these guys at first, but your brain did.
Really cranking one out of the park here, guys. Virtue signal received. Though, to be fair, there is a crypt you can visit later that is basically the log of all the Patreon donors, many of which had personal messages and even some statues custom made, which have a lot of representation there that people paid to have in there depending on what donation tier they were in, but it's not quite the same. All that said, if you want to have that sort of representation in your game, that's fine. You make whatever you want to make. It just feels like a very half-hearted attempt. Just don't make it feel ham-fisted and preachy, and you're fine. I just hope they don't pull a J.K. Rowling and retroactively say that all the monsters were all LGBTQ and that they really thought that we would pick up on that.
I'm gay.
Anyway, I digress. The environments are all pretty cool, and the atmosphere of the game, I think, is what kept me engaged, even if the battle system did start to wear after a while. The soundtrack is serviceable, though, to be honest, I don't remember too much about it. That's probably my fault for doing this review like 3 months after I played through it. I am one thing, if not timely, on these reviews. The devs did manage to get Yasunari Mitsuda of Chrono Trigger, Xenogears, Xenosaga, and even Xenoblade fame to write several tracks. You should be able to find the list online, or there's probably a playlist of just his tracks. One does seem laughably short, at only 25 seconds, but he had tracks like that in other games too, so it may not have been just a throwaway track to meet a deadline, but who knows. As I said though, the overall score is pretty decent, and there's some reprises of some tracks that were in The Messenger, which occur in the same zones as that game as well. However, as a general rule, the soundtrack has not stuck with me. There aren't tracks that I just feel like going and listening to again. I think the largest part of that may be in part due to the other major aspect of the game, the story. The story isn't the worst thing I've ever played, but there are some major weak spots that I feel stop it from really being all that great. I'll do my best to avoid spoilers here. The story follows two characters, Valera and Zale, who have been trained to become Solstice Warriors, two powerful warriors who command powers based on the sun and moon. Their job is to defeat beings known as Dwellers, which are basically just really powerful monsters who, if not kept in check, become world eaters and destroy whole worlds. Basically, there are really big stakes involved for being one of these warriors, and things will get messed up really bad if you fail. Going along with them is their friend Garl, who, let me just say this, is one of the worst characters in the game for me. I know. There are those who think he is just the most precious and amazing best friend character in the history of ever. I can understand the appeal of the guy. I can. He's loyal, optimistic, resourceful, passionate, etc. To be perfectly honest, I enjoyed him for the first bit of the game, but good lord, the writers just can't stop seeming to shove this guy down your throat as the bestest friend ever!
You're the bestest ever! I
mean, aside from sometimes acting before thinking, the guy has no character flaws. Even when he acts impulsively, it's because he's just so super amazing and wanting to help his friends. I cannot think of a single scene where he is ever portrayed in a negative light. In fact, after Valera and Zale go off to training, they obsess over getting to see Garl again. I'm sorry, I've got friends of mine I grew up with, or was close with in college, that I don't care about as much as these two care about Garl. You would think he single-handedly raised them himself or something, or that he had donated his organs to them and saved their lives or something, for how much they are just overly attached to this guy. I only feel that way about my wife and kids, and some days I question my attachment to the kids based on how they're acting. It's just a joke, guys. My son is awesome. My little girl means the world to me. If either of you ever listen to this, just know Daddy was joking and he loves you very much. But seriously, the attachment these three have for each other is kind of stupid. And Garl has no character development at all. He's just awesome and amazing and the bestest guy ever all the time. He tends to overshadow the main characters, who also have hardly any character development. And that's really the main issue here. Very little character growth throughout the game. They're essentially just milquetoast bland Padawans who just do what they're told. The Jedi are bland, and so are these characters.
Search your feelings, you know it to be true.
Now, I've mentioned little growth, and it's true that most of the characters don't develop all that much, but the rest of the cast of the game is just far more interesting. They have more interesting backstories and motivations, and while some of the mysteries surrounding them can kind of be predicted, overall I enjoyed their screen time more than the main trio. Anyway, back to the plot. The story follows these characters as they seek to eliminate what is presumed to be the last Dweller before it becomes a world eater and destroys everything. Some of the other major characters are the head of the training academy, Headmaster Moraine, and the two mentors are Lena and Brugaves. I'm not gonna lie, I can never remember Brugaves' name correctly. Anytime I've tried to remember it from memory, all I can think of is Bunavelza, which is definitely not correct, and failing at that name, the other one that comes to mind is Slarty Bartfast, which is somehow even more egregiously incorrect. The two mentors play a big role, and I don't want to say too much about what happens, but one of the big plot twists with them is, for me, one of the worst parts of the plot. I mean, the motivations are explained, but it's incredibly selfish, nonsensical, and even sort of counterproductive, considering what they ostensibly want to accomplish for Valera and Zale. Then they basically disappear for the rest of the game until the very end. Beyond that, there are several other characters such as Sarai, Rashan, and Beast who are enjoyable for different reasons, and the pirate crew certainly adds some more flavor to the game. Again, trying not to get into spoilers, There are some late game areas that very definitely have a Chrono Trigger vibe to them, and I love it. Even though some of the story beats got on my nerves, overall, I was pretty engaged with it. There's the normal ending of the game, but then there is the true ending, which requires basically doing a completionist run of the game. Speaking of the completionist, he makes a cameo in this game as the constructionist, and you can talk to him and donate materials to help build an island sanctuary village for a bunch of people. And if it wasn't clear that it's a fantasy setting yet, the most amazing thing is that you can donate materials to the constructionist, and it won't take 10 years and intense scrutiny from the public to get the materials in the hands of their intended recipients. Anyway, after completing everything in the game and collecting all the, collectibles, something easy to knock out with the map feature I talked about earlier and an online guide, you can take on the final boss again and get the true ending, which connects nicely to the messenger. There's quite a bit of content to do as far as late game side quests for some of the required materials, so you'll definitely get your money's worth out of how long the game is. This includes doing trivia games and playing the in-world minigame, which was a fun distraction from the main content. As with most games these days, there is a new game plus mode you can do, but there doesn't seem to be anything you get for completing it a second time. If you want to experience the story again without having to worry about leveling, that's the way to do it. It's up to you to determine whether it's worth it or not. Overall, I thought the story was mostly good, but some of the characterizations and decisions made by the characters seem kind of dumb. With a couple of tweaks, I think the story could have been better, but it wasn't the worst game I've ever played by a long shot. And that's unfortunate, because as many great games as it took inspiration from, it doesn't quite live up to their standard. Then again, is it really fair for me to expect Sea of Stars to live up to the level of admiration and nostalgia that I have for the games that got me hooked on the genre? Probably not. I may go back through it again once I give it some more time to sit, and maybe I'll enjoy it more on a second playthrough. Who knows? For now, I'd say it's above average, all things considered, but not more than a 7. Maybe a 7.5. If you can still get it for free off PlayStation Plus or Game Pass, give it a shot. Well, that's going to be it for me. Not sure what I'll be reviewing next game-wise. I'm hoping to get a capture card to use with the Switch to do a review of the Switch port of Super Mario RPG, but we'll see. If not, I'll be going back to finishing up the Final Fantasy Pixel remaster since I left off at Final Fantasy V. Anyway, let me know your thoughts on the game in the comments and what you thought of it. In the meantime, take care, and I'll talk to you again soon. Well, maybe not soon, but you get the idea. Have a good one.